preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
My subject tonight is what psychology can learn from religion. The religion from which psychology can learn anything is the religion which has itself learned something from psychology. What it can learn from psychology, I've tried to set forth in the 3 preceding lectures. Tonight I shall discuss what psychology can learn from religion that is thus instructed. Before proceeding with the lecture, I wish to call your attention to the general layout of the summary that you have here, so that you will not feel lost in the large amount of paper on which it is written. The first part is introductory, and the main point in it is contained in the 3rd paragraph, which says, many psychological facts can, the last resort, be understood only through a religious interpretation of the life of man. That is the idea underlying the introduction. The first part, which is designated by the Roman numeral 1, deals with the meaning of God in human experience. What we understand by the belief in God. The second section, Roman numeral 2, deals with the relation of the idea of God to ethics. The third section, Roman numeral 3, defines religion as belonging and indicates in what way that conception of religion or that function of religion is essential to the psychologist if he wants to deal effectively with a human being. And the concluding section, 4, deals with religion as responsibility. That is to say, the psychologist must learn from religion this fact about the human being, the fact of responsibility, if he wishes to understand human nature correctly. That, in sum, is the idea which I try to expound in this lecture. Now, to come to the beginning again, we have been discussing religion as a natural phenomenon. By that I mean to imply that religion in the traditional sense as a supernatural revelation is not the thing from which, or not the kind of religion from which psychology can learn anything. Psychology cannot learn from phenomena that pretend or that claim to be supernatural, because psychology is a natural science, or the science of natural phenomena, and therefore can learn nothing from phenomena that claim to be supernatural. As a natural phenomenon, religion is not only subject matter for psychology and sociology, but also provides both of these human sciences with data that are essential to the proper comprehension of human behavior. That is to say, psychology and sociology can well afford to make use of the data, of the facts and ideas which religion as a natural phenomenon supplies them with. As a natural phenomenon, religion viewed generically is a system of beliefs and actions. By being viewed generically, I mean being viewed in such a way as to include all manifestations of religion, all kinds of religions, even those that claim to be supernatural in character. Viewed in that way, that is, as an overall conception of religion, it is that which is shared by a people or church, that is, by a group, by a society or a community, and which, in being so shared, performs the following two functions. First, it creates and expresses a sense of fellowship among the members of that group. That is to say, it gives rise to a sense of unity, a sense of kinship, a sense of mutual belonging. And it also expresses that sense of kinship and mutual belonging. And secondly, it gives the individual a way of life whereby he can achieve salvation or self-fulfillment. That is to say, in addition to its function as a social phenomenon, all religions, or all forms of religion, have a personal meaning, and as a source of personal meaning, religion gives the individual a way of life whereby he can fulfill himself and achieve that which constitutes his greatest happiness, if you will, or that which he regards as his complete salvation. Psychology has to learn from this kind of religion, or religion understood in this way, something that it does not as yet include in its scope. Because as psychology has been pursued hitherto, it has tended to stress the extent to which man is dominated by the unconscious. It has helped and helps remove the obstacles that prevent man's assertion of his own personality and freedom. That is the therapeutic function of psychology. That is all to the good, but that is only half the task that the person who comes to the psychologist can or meets his needs. It meets his needs only halfway. Why? Because as it is at present pursued, psychology fails to give the patient, the one who comes to him for help, any affirmative goal to personality. The psychologist fails to evaluate the ideals and the potentialities of the patient. As a matter of fact, he claims that that would interfere with his therapy to define the ideals, to point out to the patient what he ought to do, or to indicate what in him he fails to carry to fruition. As at present constituted, psychology functions merely as a compass that helps the patient to find direction in life, but it does not tell the one who comes to it where to go. It may even give him a sense of direction, which is a very important thing and is a very much needed help. But it stops short in that it does not guide the human being as to the goal that he ought to pursue. And that is only half the task with man. Likewise, with regard to cultural environment, psychology stresses its negative, but not its creative influences. In speaking, for example, as Freud does, of the superego, which is the internalization or the introduction into the mind of the individual of the cultural taboos and prohibitions. This superego interferes with the natural course of his life and creates neuroses. This is the function of psychology as viewed by modern psychologists. But it does not recognize the fact that no creativity, no self-fulfillment on the part of the individual human being is possible without self-discipline. And it is not enough merely to criticize the culture which interferes with the natural expression of one's needs or desires, but it is also necessary to point out that in this culture are present the elements of self-discipline without which the human being cannot even achieve happiness or the fulfillment of his natural needs. No therapy is really possible without evoking the positive forces both in personality and in culture. And it is these positive forces that at present lie outside of the scope of psychology. And it is for these positive forces that I believe psychology ought to go to religion. Many psychological facts can, in the last resort, be understood only through a religious interpretation of the life of man. To quote from Fromm, man has not only psychological needs, but an equally imperative need to be related to the world and to himself in order to avoid intolerable loneliness and isolation. Now, this relation of the individual to the world and to himself, which seems to be designated by Fromm as not being a psychological need, is really a religious need. And it is the recognition of this need that even Fromm insists on as being essential to the psychologist. If the human being is to preserve his sanity, Fromm goes on to say, man must have some kind of spiritual relatedness to the world, some frame of orientation and devotion. Now, where is that frame of orientation and devotion to come to the human being? Where's psychology to get it from? The only source of such knowledge is religion. Now, in order that religion may constitute a source of such knowledge, we have to speak of and think of religion in the terms which are compatible with our present knowledge of human nature, that is, with psychology. In other words, in terms which we have arrived at as a result of the analysis of psychology in its relation to religion in the last 3 lectures. If we are to recognize and evaluate the ideals and potentialities of the human person and his cultural environment, we have to explore the significance of the generic element in religion as such. We have to identify that element which is common to all religions and which I speak of as expressing man's latent desire to be fully human. Man's latent desire, latent, not expressed, not explicit, but for the most part hidden away so that he knows it himself, hardly. And what is that desire? To be fully human. This, I believe, is the element in common to all religions. And it is that element which we have to deal with if we are to have psychology learn from religion how it is to pursue its own aims more effectively. That furnishes us the cue as to what underlies the crude and grotesque notions of godhood. This idea that every human being, to the extent that he is at all normal and human, of course, has within him something that does not give him rest. And I speak of that as the desire to be fully human. The history of religion teaches us that the God concept is dynamic. That is to say, this notion of godhood, which is the symbol of this desire of man to be fully himself, has been expressed in an infinite variety of ways, from the most barbaric to the most highly cultured, philosophic, and spiritual. Therefore, what we must realize when we speak of religion in general is that the God idea, which is the center of religion, is not anything static. Even at its highest development, it still can go beyond that. And certainly that highest development did not come suddenly on man, but is the result of many, many ages of evolution. However morally harmful the ascription of the sacredness to the wrong objects and persons has been, not to have a sense of the sacred is to be humanly deficient. You realize that I take a leap at once to the way in which the God idea expresses itself in all religions. It expresses itself in the feeling of sacredness or holiness. Now, holiness or sacredness is ascribed to the most bizarre kind of experiences or objects, due, of course, to man's ignorance. And in many instances, the fact that such holiness or sacredness was ascribed to objects that are inherently destructive, that militate against, or ideas or strivings that militate against man's becoming fully human, naturally has caused harm, moral harm. Nevertheless, we dare not infer from that fact that mankind would have been better off without having a feeling for sacredness, an appreciation of certain things, certain situations as being inherently holy. Sacredness is the quality or value of things or persons from the standpoint of their contribution to man's becoming fully human. When you ask yourself fundamentally, what is holiness? What makes a thing holy? You can feel that about some very intimate and personal experiences in relation to your husband or your wife, or to parents or to children, or certain objects that are associated with them, call forth a sense of holiness, a realization that you are dealing with something that you want to handle very delicately. What is behind it all? The answer, which I think is the correct one, is that somehow this thing which calls forth that reaction, that feeling of holiness, must in some way help us to become more human. And to lack, therefore, a sense of the sacred is to be indifferent to that which distinguishes man from other creatures. Now we come to number 2 in the first section, 2 in Arabic numerals. Religion in all its forms represents man's groping efforts to identify what man needs in order to achieve that dynamic equilibrium which enables his life not only to go on, but also to rise to higher levels of reality through its very struggle for existence. You will remember I pointed out that in this unconscious condition of life, creatures, whether human or subhuman, somehow manage to achieve an equilibrium. They have none of the neuroses that the human being has. Neurosis spells disequilibrium. Now, it is the purpose of religion to have the conscious achieve that equilibrium which the living being achieves on an unconscious level. Therefore, it is the purpose of religion to enable the human being not only to exist and to achieve an equilibrium, but an ever higher equilibrium and ever higher levels of reality as a result of their very struggle for existence. All that we speak of as the history of mankind is a history of struggle against difficulties and dangers. The ability to overcome those difficulties and dangers have led man to be more than what he was before he struggled. Religion plays a great role in enabling man to achieve this higher level of existence. In nature as well, we know that cataclysms like earthquakes and tidal waves wipe out whole species of creatures. After the earth settles down again, creatures come out somehow that indicate a higher or more complex life form. In the same way, the dangers and the difficulties through which man passed constituted the cataclysms after which man, or from which man has always emerged somehow a more complex and a higher type of creature. At present, we seem to be in a position to approximate more closely than ever the identification of the main factor in that dynamic equilibrium. That is, we know more about the human being to know just what it is that brings about the equilibrium between himself and his environment. It is the process of organicity which functions as the all-impelling process of integration and individuation. Please note this statement. This is the theme song of all that I have been saying and expect to say the rest of this lecture. Namely, that there is this something about the human being which I speak of as the process of organicity. That is the process which expresses itself in the twofold fashion of integration, that is, it drives him to become a part of a larger self, and it also drives him to be more fully himself. That's individuation. That process of organicity, which expresses itself in this twofold fashion, operates in the atom with its electrons and protons, in the molecule with its atoms, in the crystal with its molecules, and thus all through the chemical combinations that enter into plant and animal forms. This same process operates in the solar system and in the vast constellations and galaxies. It likewise operates in man's mental and social life, in his conscious and unconscious. You see then why I stress this process of organicity, a process that underlies the whole of creation, from the infinitesimal atom to the infinite galaxies. Theologically, this idea has been well stated by Aquinas when he said that the world process is not contained in your notes, but I'm quoting, that the world process, with every sub-movement in it, is seeking a reaching of created being, is a seeking of, or a reaching of created being toward God. This is the process of organicity. What emerges from this process of organicity can best be exemplified by commonplace experience, like learning to ride a bicycle or to play an instrument. The painful awareness accompanying the first steps in the learning process inclines us to doubt the possibility of our ever coming to master these instruments. Youngster tries to ride a bicycle. He hasn't ridden it. The first time, he wonders whether he'll ever learn. Second time, he falls off, hurts himself. And of course, the musical instrument, that lasts longer. Every individual move seems to make any coordination among the muscles, the eyes, and the mind, forever impossible. Yet a moment comes, as if from nowhere, when every move falls into its place, every muscle acts with an ease and spontaneity which enables us to take our minds off the strain of coordination and to focus it on the underlying purpose of the entire undertaking. And one is not aware at all, after he's learned to ride a bicycle or to play an instrument, he's not at all aware of the individual movements. He's aware only of the general pattern of either the playing or the riding or whatever action the instrument is to produce. Or take the case of having to write an essay or a book. It all begins with a vague tension, a few scattered ideas. We brood for days or weeks. Again, as if out of nowhere, every idea falls into its place and the pattern of the whole stands out sharply. We are asked advice, or we are offered opportunities. We don't know whether we are to accept the opportunity or how to advise. And we say, well, we'll sleep over it. And we get up next morning and somehow the whole thing falls into a definite pattern. Human life is like an orchestra trying to play a symphony, and the only analogy would be trying to play a symphony, a whole orchestra trying to play a symphony extemporaneously in public. You can imagine the strain that is involved. Unless we are highly expert in the music of living, we are bound to be out of tune and to make nothing but a cacophony. And so that is why so many of us are so harsh sounding. Now, where does the principle of organicity come into this? Well, this is what I mean by organicity. The tendency of things to fall into their places and to be integrated into a larger pattern without a clear and purposeful direction on the part of each element in ourselves or in what we do. This organicity operates as what is known as wisdom in nature, or as the wisdom of the body, as the wisdom of culture. In all of these, organicity gives rise to the processes of self-healing, self-correcting, and equilibration. Such processes always proceed from some totality to some part of that totality. It is that which makes each such totality, from the atom to the furthest galaxy, more than the sum of its parts. Now, this process of organicity, as you see underlined, is the important idea that I wish to stress. This process of organicity is Godhood, which functions as the superconscious in man. In contrast with the unconscious and even with the conscious, there is something in man which is superconscious and which man has tried to articulate by means of his various ideas of God. This conception, incidentally, coincides with that which is developed by W.P. Montague in his book called Belief Unbound, a book which I highly recommend. He there shows grounds for believing in what he calls an ascending force, a nisus, a striving, a thrust forward toward concentration, organization, and life. It is that which he too identifies as God. You notice what I'm attempting in all of these lectures is, as far as possible, to have us understand the idea of God not in supernatural terms, not in terms which tell us that God is beyond our comprehension, but on the contrary, in terms which if we only concentrate sufficiently on the understanding of our own nature, we can come to experience as an immediate reality. And I believe that it is only when we identify God with some real immediate experience as pointing to Him, we are simply using words that have no special meaning. The superconscious operates not merely as a single category in one of the dimensions, that is, one of the dimensions of the mind, but as culminating and unifying category of all other categories. Those of you who were here before will recall that I spoke of the mind as operating in three distinct dimensions. And we must recognize, as I point out here, that this superconscious operates not merely as a single category in any one of the dimensions, but it is the culminating and unifying category of all other categories. It integrates the conscious and the unconscious, each by itself and both into a unity. Its very pervasiveness, which means that the reality of God, the pervasiveness of God in human nature, is perhaps the main reason for God, or the experience of God, being generally overlooked in the study of the conscious. But the fact is that it warrants at least as much attention as the unconscious. In other words, while it is true that we have learned a great deal about ourselves as a result of Freud's discovery of the part that the unconscious plays in all our conscious actions, it is nevertheless equally true that he has failed to realize that the totality of our nature, the gestalt, what is called in psychology, the whole of our being, and our being a part of the rest of creation, these two aspects themselves affect the conscious, certainly as much, if not more, than the unconscious. It is the superconscious that raises human society from the level of the various collectivities among the subhuman forms through the process of socialization, and the human person above the narrow individualism of other living beings through the process of personalization. Only in terms of the universal process of dynamic integration as a metaphysical superconscious drive, that is, as God, is it possible to establish the categories of wisdom, truth, and goodness. That is to say, without recognizing the reality of this universal process, there's no basis for the cultivation. There's no rationale or drive for the cultivation of that which we identify as wisdom or truth and goodness. It is that recognition that raises them above the relativities which they are necessarily subject to. That is, truth and goodness and wisdom are necessarily thought of always as relative to specific situation in the process of human living. We have to feel that there is some bedrock of value in these attributes of the human being before we think of adjusting them to the particular situation in which we happen to find ourselves. Truth is essentially what? That is to say, what is the bedrock of truth as a derivative from this dynamic integration. Truth is essentially consistency and coherence among the various parts of experience, particularly among the symbols in our universe of values and discourse. That is to say, in all our thinking, in all our feeling, we have to experience a certain coherence, a certain consistency, and truth. That is a desire to run away from any kind of illusion or delusion is essential to our achieving such inner consistency or coherence. Such consistency and coherence are demanded by the innate desire to achieve wholeness or health. This desire expresses itself as a drive for integration, which is hampered by the lack of truth. Now, what is goodness? Goodness is the kind of interpersonal activity which grows out of the cosmic drive for unity and cooperation among individuals and groups. It is, in other words, activity, not cognitive, not intellectual, but the expression of the will. Activity among persons. It's an interpersonal activity which grows out of the cosmic drive for unity and cooperation among individuals and groups. That is, derives from that which we identify as God. The main criterion of goodness is the scope of unity and cooperation to which it leads. The greater the scope, the better we are, the better is what we do. Both truth and goodness, to continue with section 3, both truth and goodness are the values that enter into consideration on part of the individual as he rises to the status of personality through the exercise of his freedom and responsibility in his relations to other individuals or to groups. Truth and goodness likewise enter into consideration on the part of the group as it rises to the status of community through the exercise of freedom and responsibility in its relations, that is, in the relations of the community to its constituent individuals and to other groups. All this, put into non-technical terms, means that without belief in God as the process that makes for whatever there is of movement, order, life, growth, and thought, there would be no ultimate basis for ethical values, nor meaning or destiny to human personality. Now, please realize that what I'm trying to emphasize in all of this is that while it is true that ethics, conduct, in terms of justice, righteousness, and kindness, is independent of religion of a supernatural character, religion in the traditional sense, it is impossible. There's no basis for it without religion of a rational, natural type, of the kind that I define here, without the experience of God as a natural experience. You cannot have a real basis for ethics, even if you do not identify that basis as God. You don't call him by the name, but there is this psychological force which, if you were historically minded and had an understanding of how an idea can change, and how a name, a term can designate different phenomena, different developments of the same phenomenon, you would have no difficulty, no matter how rationalist you are as an ethical culturist, in identifying the basis as God. Thus we arrive, by way of an empirical approach, in a sense, to the same conclusion that Spinoza arrived at deductively in his ethics. He starts the other way. Instead of starting from human nature, an analysis of it, to the idea of God as accounting for that which makes man human, he starts the other way by beginning with the idea of God and then arriving at that which makes man human. That's why it's called ethics. And ethically, he arrives at the same conclusions that we speak of here. In Jewish religion, acting upon this principle is recommended in the motto, "Whatever you do, let it be for the sake of heaven." A striking illustration of how some underlying religious principles can add drive even to spiritually and ethically conducted life is in the story of Albert Schweitzer, who tells how the principle reverence for life flashed upon his mind. And by the way, in this passage, which I shall read, statement by Albert Schweitzer, you will also have a demonstration of what I mean by this process of organicity, which acts in the way of enabling many ideas to come together and to form an organized pattern after long cogitation or meditation. This is what he says. Slowly we kept upstream. He was in the heart of Africa, and he was coming to Lambarene, where he was to have his hospital. Slowly we kept upstream, laboriously feeling for channels between the sandbanks. Lost in thought, I struggled to find the elementary and universal conception of the ethical, which I had not discovered in any philosophy. You see, the elementary and universal conception of the ethical, which I had not discovered in any philosophy. Sheet after sheet I covered with disconnected sentences. Late on the third day, at the very moment we were making our way through a herd of hippopotamuses, there flashed upon my mind, a funny time and a funny place to have anything flash on one's mind, unforeseen and unsought, the phrase reverence for life, for all life. And that phrase, reverence for life, became his guiding star throughout his life. I mean, you see the marvel of the human mind, and in this case, of course, you have also the marvel of the man who has lived up to what his mind revealed to him. Now, there's no supernatural revelation in that. It's a purely natural phenomenon. And he discovers God. Life means to him God, and the reverence for life means religion. Psychology should learn, therefore, from religion that the belief in God, which conforms with the reality principle as promulgated by intelligence, is indispensable to the kind of collective and individual life that can help to bring about a better world. You notice I use the term reality principle taken from modern psychology, but I add to it as promulgated by reason or intelligence, and that is essential. In conforming with it, we arrive at a true understanding of belief of what God is, and that such a belief is essential in helping us to arrive at a deeper sense of reality. Such a belief in God implies not only the need of exercising a sense of duty and a will to live up to what one ought to do, it also implies the need of being receptive to what is significant, or of what is significant, and being cognizant of whatever has meaning and value. I'm not talking merely of ethics. The aesthetic expression of life is implied in this belief in God as I've defined it. There can hardly be any greater blunder than that of overlooking the fullness of life Normal religion, with its constant call for gratitude to God. See, praising God is the substance of worship. Normal religion constantly calls a man to express his gratitude to God. That call is a call to appreciate the good in life and to resist the temptation to view the world as a meaningless chaos or as a vale of tears. Now we come to section 3. Religion has always been intuitively aware of the part played by parents in the socialization of the human being. It has therefore stressed their authority and surrounded it with strict sanctions. Now, it is for psychology to realize fully the implications of that fact in religion. It means that love and fear, which constitute fundamentally the reaction of man to that sense of organicity, to God, to that which is holy. Love and fear is the nature of that reaction. Where do they begin with a human being, if not in the child's relation to the parent, first to the mother and then to the father? Modern psychology has discovered that the way parents bring up their child during the first years of life largely determine his character and happiness for the rest of his life. Upon that upbringing depends the child's ability to free himself from the authority of his parents and to mature into a self-activating personality. That is, if the parents are wise, if they are not self-centered, if they do not exercise a possessive hold on the child, their very love and their very kindness enable the child to become sufficiently mature and to free himself from their authority. That is the way wise parents train their children. But we are apt to forget that without socialization, one cannot become human, and without authority, there can be no socialization. It's all very good for parents to train their child in such a way as to enable him to free himself from authority, their authority, but not from all authority. Because if he's to be a social being, then he must recognize authority, because without authority, no one can be a social being. Once we reckon with a caveat, that is with a warning, that authority must be objective, that is not self-centered, that it must be based upon expertness in guidance and not upon the ability to coerce, we cannot dwell too much on the need for integrating the child into a series of increasingly inclusive groups, beginning with life in the home. That is what psychology should learn from religion, that the home is an indispensable element to the life of the child from the standpoint of authority as well as from the standpoint of freedom. To achieve a personality of health, we need some external limitation, as a river needs a bank to keep it flowing. We need to have duties, responsibilities. There is such a thing as going crazy from too much freedom, you know. The religious emphasis on the sanctity of marriage and the home, that is, treating the marriage and the home as sacred, should be borne in mind by the psychologist in advising parents as to their relations to each other whenever there is danger of a home breaking up, the effect that is bound to have on the child. What psychology should learn from religion is the way in which the human being in the family is dealt with in an entirely different fashion from the way he is dealt with outside the family. By that I mean that in the family each man is regarded for his own sake, whereas in society he merely represents a certain function. The neutral incorporation of a service, a replaceable cog in a great machine. But at home, a person is accepted as a definite, irreplaceable individual. Thus, the family becomes an institution which maintains and restores in man a consciousness of his own humanity, which present-day society denies him. Fundamentally, this is what religion has sought to make of society, a familial instead of a functional community. This is the principle underlying the concept of church, or in Jewish tradition, the ecclesia, the religious community of Israel. Psychology can well afford to learn from religion that the main emphasis on education is not the acquisition of skills, but the socialization of the child, by transmitting to him and internalizing within him the system of values which act as a cohesive influence in the society into which he is born. This is to be accomplished not by personal exhortation, but by unremitting gentleness, kindness, and love on the part of parents. Religion, in intuitively sensing the impelling drive for togetherness and cooperation on the one hand, and individual responsibility on the other, has been the medium through which God, as the power that makes for integration, has manifested himself in making society and civilization possible. Religion has created all those agencies of the mind and spirit which may serve to gather up the traditions of a people, transmit them from generation to generation, thereby create that authority of treasured common life which constitutes a civilization. With this aspect of religion as a social phenomenon, psychology should reckon in its recognition of the part played in mental health by the need of belonging. When belonging to a people is attended by conflicting interests or loyalties, the psychologist should be wary of attempting to uproot the patient from the group in which he has been brought up. While belonging satisfies the organic need for being part of a larger totality, there's also need of being inwardly integrated and whole. Such psychic health, religion has unconsciously sought to achieve in the individual by demanding of him wholehearted and whole-souled commitment to God. Psychology may thus learn from religion that commitment to a cause which takes the individual out of himself is a prerequisite to mental health. Now you notice I have here two important things that psychology should learn from religion, namely that a human being cannot be happy, cannot be normal, cannot be sane unless he belongs to a group that accepts him not merely by virtue of some clever ability, some cleverness or ability that he possesses, but by virtue of his being a human being for himself as a member of a family. And secondly, a human being to be sane and healthy must be committed to a cause. And the idea of God, of course, represents the sum of all causes. Now you have a very fine illustration of what happens to a human being whom the psychologist analyzes without regard to these two requirements of religion. In a book like Wasteland, what is the name of the... That's right, Joe Sinclair. There you have the story of an analysis which does not recognize really these two important factors in the makeup of a human being. That brings us now to section 4. Religion at its best has not so emphasized the unity and solidarity of the group as to sacrifice the individuality of the human person. Therein it has intuitively, though gropingly, sought to give expression to the metaphysical drive for organicity, which is no less a process of individuation than it is of cooperation. The freedom of the person, or moral freedom, is the source of responsibility for furthering the unity of mankind. Human life has evolved the conscious, an agency that functions in the individual and does so best when freed from the pressure of the group. The conscious, given the opportunity to function in freedom, becomes creative, changes environment, that is, transforms the environment and enlarges the scope of human living. That is how man rises to ever higher levels of being. For that reason, religion has never regarded the individual as a commodity or as expendable. It has always held out to him the promise of reward and threats of punishment far beyond the power of any human agency to carry out, thereby bringing the potency of godhood within the conscious experience of the individual. The belief in the hereafter as presented by traditional religion never implied loss of individuality, but on the contrary, stressed its conservation. By that I mean to imply that immortality, as promised by philosophy, on the contrary, always implied the loss of individuality and the sinking of oneself into what it speaks of as the active intellect or God. And that is due to the fact that philosophy does not reckon with with the unconscious and with the emotional values of life, nor with interpersonal relations to the extent that it should.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.